The tall grass at the edge of Elias Thorne's property didn't just mark a boundary of land, it marked a boundary of spirit. For 3 generations, the Thornes had lived by a simple code: tend your own soil, respect your neighbors, and keep your word. But in the autumn of his 65th year, Elias realized that the world beyond his fence, the world of the Maplewood estates, was governed by a much darker set of rules. It began with a silence where there should have been sound. Elias was a man of habit. Every Tuesday, the thick envelope from his brother in Montana would arrive. Every Thursday, his pension statements and utility bills. But as October bled into November, the mailbox at the end of his long gravel drive stood empty more often than not. At first, he blamed the changing season, then the thinning ranks of the local post office. But when a certified letter from his attorney regarding his water rights vanished into thin air, Elias stopped making excuses. He didn't rant. He didn't post on social media. He simply began to watch. The shadow in the bathrobe. On a Tuesday morning, 2 hours before the sun would even think about cresting the eastern ridge, Elias sat in his darkened kitchen. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't even brew coffee, lest the steam fog the glass. He sat with a pair of bird-watching binoculars and waited. At 5:45 a.m., a shape materialized from the manicured cul-de-sac of Maplewood Estates. It was a woman, draped in a heavy, quilted floral bathrobe that looked like a moving garden in the moonlight. She wore fuzzy slippers that crunched softly on the frost-covered gravel. It was Karen Blake. Elias watched, his breath hitching, as the president of the HOA reached his mailbox. She didn't look around with the furtive glances of a thief. She moved with the bored confidence of a homeowner checking her own mail. She flipped open the lid, reached inside, and pulled out a stack of envelopes. With the practiced ease of a card dealer, she fanned them out. She kept 3. Elias recognized the blue stationery of his brother's letters, and shoved the rest back into the box. She closed the lid with a firm, authoritative clack and turned back toward the gated community, disappearing into the mist. Elias sat in the dark for a long time. He felt a cold, oily knot of anger in his stomach. This wasn't just a neighbor being nosy. This was a violation of the sanctity of his home. But he knew Karen. He knew that if he walked onto her porch now, she would scream harassment, call the police, and use her standing in the community to paint him as a delusional old man. To catch a predator who believes they are the law, you have to bring in a power they cannot bully. A week later, the monthly Community Safety and Harmony meeting was held at the Maplewood Clubhouse. Elias attended, standing at the back of the room in his work jacket, looking every bit the fringe resident Karen liked to mock. During the open forum, Elias stepped to the microphone. "I've been noticing a lot of mail going missing lately," he said, his voice level. "Important stuff. Legal documents. I was wondering if anyone else has had trouble with the carriers." Karen, seated at the high dais behind a nameplate that looked like it was carved from solid marble, didn't even look up from her notes. She let out a soft, performative sigh. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "We've discussed this. You live on the periphery. The Postal Service often struggles with, let's call them non-standard addresses. Perhaps if you kept your property in better repair, the carriers would take you more seriously. It's an internal delivery issue, not an HOA concern. Next." A few of her loyalists in the front row chuckled. Karen offered a tight, victorious smile. She thought she had buried the issue. In reality, she had just provided the final piece of evidence Elias needed: intent and denial. The next morning, Elias didn't go to the local police. He drove 40 miles to the regional headquarters of the United States Postal Inspection Service, USPS. He met with Inspector Miller, a man with a face like a flint axe and a deep appreciation for federal statutes. "People forget," Miller said, looking over Elias's handwritten log of missing items. "The mailbox isn't your property, and it isn't the HOA's property. It's a federal installation. When she reached into that box, she didn't just rob you. She robbed the United States government." Miller explained Title 18, Section 1708 of the U.S. Code. Mail theft wasn't a neighborhood dispute. It was a felony punishable by up to 5 years in federal prison and fines that could bankrupt a small estate. "We don't just want to catch her," Miller said. "We want to seal the case so tight she can't wiggle out of it." 3 days later, the bait was set. Inside Elias's mailbox sat a thick, official-looking envelope from a fictitious law firm. Inside that envelope was a high-frequency GPS transmitter, no thicker than a coin, tucked into a dummy stack of papers. Inspector Miller and his team were stationed in an unmarked van 2 streets over, their screens glowing with a blue that represented the heart of the trap. Elias sat in his kitchen, watching through his binoculars. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when the floral bathrobe appeared. Karen moved faster this time, perhaps emboldened by her public dismissal of Elias's concerns. She reached the box, snatched the law firm envelope with a predatory jerk, and tucked it deep into the pocket of her robe. She didn't even check the rest of the mail. She wanted the big fish. "Target has the package," Elias whispered into a handheld radio Miller had given him. "Copy that," Miller's voice crackled back. "We have signal. She's moving." The blue dot on the inspector's screen traveled down the sidewalk, turned left at the fountain, and entered the driveway of 124, Oak Court, Karen's pristine, white-pillared home.
10 minutes passed. Then 15.
"Signal confirms the envelope has been opened," Miller reported. "She's broken the seal. We're moving in." Elias walked down his driveway, reaching the curb just as 3 black SUVs and 2 local patrol cars converged on Oak Court. Karen was on her front porch, still in her bathrobe, holding a cup of tea in one hand and Elias's legal documents in the other. She looked up, her expression shifting from confusion to a mask of practiced outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded as Inspector Miller stepped onto her lawn, flashing a gold shield. "I am the president of this association. You are trespassing on private." "Federal agents, Mrs. Blake," Miller interrupted, his voice booming so loudly that neighbors began opening their front doors. "We have a warrant for your arrest for the theft of United States mail. We also have a search warrant for this premises." "This is a mistake," Karen shrieked, her voice cracking. I was inspecting the mail for contraband. Mr. Thorne is a threat to this community's safety. I have the authority to." "You have the authority to regulate the color of a fence, ma'am," Miller said as he reached for his handcuffs. "You do not have the authority to interfere with the federal post.
Turn around."
The clack-clack of the silver cuffs echoed across the cul-de-sac. It was a sound that seemed to shatter the spell Karen had cast over the neighborhood for a decade. Neighbors, people who had lived in fear of Karen's fines and venomous emails, stood on their porches with their phones out. They recorded the Queen of Maplewood being led down her own driveway in her slippers, her bathrobe fluttering in the wind like a white flag of surrender. The aftermath was a clinical dissection of a dictatorship. With Karen in federal custody, the HOA board held an emergency session that very night. Faced with the evidence of a federal felony and the looming threat of being named as co-conspirators, the board voted 5-0 to remove her from her position and strip her of her membership. As the federal prosecutors dug into her life, they found more than just Elias's letters. In her home, they discovered a trophy room of sorts, stacks of mail belonging to other residents she considered problematic. She had been intercepting bank statements, medical results, and personal letters, using the information to manipulate and blackmail her way to total control. Karen Blake was eventually indicted on 14 counts of mail theft and 1 count of obstruction of justice. The safety and harmony she had preached was revealed to be a regime of systematic voyeurism and theft. A month later, Elias Thorne stood at his mailbox. The air was crisp, and the morning sun was finally warm on his back. A car slowed down, a neighbor from deep within the estates, a man Elias had never spoken to. The man rolled down his window and gave a short, respectful nod. "Thanks for making the call, Elias," he said. "We all knew something was wrong. We just didn't have the guts to look in the box." Elias reached into his mailbox and pulled out a single, thick envelope from his brother in Montana. He tucked it under his arm and looked toward the gated community. The gates were still there, but the fear was gone. The HOA was being reorganized by a group of residents who actually cared about things like park benches and streetlights, rather than power and secrets. For Elias, the incident was never really about the letters. It was about the fact that no matter how much power someone thinks they have, no matter what title they hide behind or what estates they claim to rule, they are still bound by the same truth. He walked back toward his cabin, the sound of his own boots on his own land the only authority he needed to hear. "Would you like me to write a scene describing the discovery process in the federal trial where more of Karen's secrets are revealed, or perhaps a story about how the neighborhood changes under the new, more relaxed HOA board?"